The University of California, Riverside presents Blue, Gold, and Black, the podcast that's dedicated to amplifying Black voices at UCR. I'm Dominique Beale from UCR's Community Engagement and Outreach Unit. In each episode, we'll be talking to UCR students, campus leaders, and community partners to explore the intersection of being Black and being a Highlander at UCR. And I can't wait for you to meet today's guest. Let's get started. All right, everybody, welcome back to Blue, Gold, and Black, where we are amplifying Black voices here at UCR. My name is Dominique Beale. I am your host, and today we have a really special guest. Dr. Raquell Rall is joining us from the Graduate School of Education. She's going to be talking to us today a little bit about her areas of research and some of the courses that she teaches here at UCR. And we're also going to get a little bit of her background story and a little bit of her history so we can add some context to all of the great work that she's doing here at UCR in trying to make sure that Black students are being supported. Dr. Rall, how are you doing today?
I'm doing good. How about you?
I'm doing pretty good. Super happy it's a Friday today. So making sure we could try and stay out of the heat as well.
Right.
But thank you so much for giving us a little bit of your time. We're super happy to have you here. Yeah, so let's go ahead and just dive in. If you could really quickly, Dr. Rall, go ahead and tell us what it is exactly that you instruct here at UCR and some of the other roles that you have here at the university.
Sure. So I am an assistant professor of higher education in the Graduate School of Education. So all of my courses are housed in education, and I teach at both the undergraduate and the graduate level. And for the graduate level, that means master's students as well as PhD students. So at the undergraduate level, I teach a course, Ed 51, which is kind of like a critical issues in higher education course, where we look at a lot of things that are pressing for the time, right? Like, so if we were doing it today, it would be like COVID, Black Lives Matter, all these different things will be going on in that. So that's a fun course to teach to undergrads. I also teach a first quarter seminar for freshmen, kind of like an intro to education. That's Ed 93. And then for upper division, let's see, undergraduates, I have Education 151, which is like women who control the university. So it talks about education and leadership, governance, administration, all these different things, and just kind of like who is excluded. So it's women, but that's in parentheses because we know that typically men, and more specifically white men, kind of lead institutions of higher education. And then at the graduate level, I teach courses like Ed 248, which is scholarship and literature. So we talk a lot about, some of the core pieces of higher education. We work on writing a literature review. I teach a course on higher education governance, which is 248G, where we talk about how the institution is governed, right? Like, who are these movers and shakers who make the decisions on behalf of the people who are on the ground, if you will. So that's one of my favorite courses to teach. I also teach organ admin, which is education 248O, which takes a slightly different direction of that. Still talking about leadership and people who are in control, but looking at like the administration, because there's a difference between administration and governance. Take the class and you'll know. And then what else do I teach? And I'm doing a brand new course this year. I'll teach one on Black Brilliance Matters. So talking about the role and experience of Blacks in higher education. So looking at it from various stakeholder groups, and I'll be teaching that in the winter. So I think that's everything. I probably forgot something. All those are not taught in 1 year, right? I alternate sometimes, but that's kind of like the span of my instructional load.
Nice. No, yeah, that's really amazing. Very busy, I can see. And so with those courses that you take, obviously we're a research one university. So kind of shed some light on some of the specific areas of research that you partake in, kind of in conjunction, but also outside of the courses you teach specifically.
Absolutely. So I think that, my courses a lot of times are an outgrowth of my research, and both of those, the courses and my research, are outgrowth of me. So they're necessarily intertwined and deal with things that I'm passionate about, which are leadership and race. And so I would define my research at that intersection of leadership, governance, race, equity, all those different things. And how do we put them together, and how do we not continue to keep them in these separate silos? Because often we talk about leaders, but we don't want to talk about equity, right, and that sort of thing. Or we talk about equity, but we don't talk about leaders. Specifically, I look at governing boards of higher education. So if you're thinking about the UC, that would be like the Board of Regents. So I want to look at those individuals who have by law, right? They have this de jure control, like completely like the law control of the institution, but no one really knows who they are, right? And they're these movers and shakers, but they delegate a lot of their powers, but I think because they're out of the limelight a lot, they can get away with a lot more, and I don't think that that's okay. And I also don't think that they're in tune as much as they should be with what's happening on the ground, especially with people who don't look like them, because the majority of governing boards across the nation, when we're talking about especially public boards, but private boards too, but there's a different kind of appointment and selection for that, are older, wealthy, white men, right? And as we know, higher education still has a ways to go with diversification, right, and inclusion, all these different things, but it doesn't look like that anymore, right? It looked like that back in the day, but we look a lot different, which necessarily means for me that we need different perspectives. And so I look at the ways in which these people, this small group of elite folks who really, and sadly, I feel like they don't have a background in higher education, right? They don't have a background in education. They primarily come from business and all these different walks of life, but then they're making decisions on behalf of institutions of higher education, right? And on behalf of people who don't look like them. And so I try to push that to kind of make, move equity from the periphery to the core in those conversations and that decision making. Like, how can we have equity be central in all the decisions? How can we make sure that they understand that equity is not separate from, but every decision is an equity decision. So if we're going to increase tuition, that's an equity decision, right? Like, it's not just a bottom line, a dollar decision. It's like, who will we then be pricing out? Who are we excluding, right? Are we excluding people of color, low SES, all these different things? So I think that that's really important, and we haven't focused on that group enough. And it's really important because it's hard for us to diversify that field, because in public institutions, that's a gubernatorially appointed position, and we know it, 47 out of the 50 governors we have are white men too, so it perpetuates this cycle, right? And so if the governor can appoint these folks by really no qualifications, then we have this thing where systematically, right, and systemically, we continue to have white men, a white governor appoints white board members who then appoint white chancellors and presidents who then appoint, and so for me, that's a problem. It's like something's not right with this picture. And then the other piece of race, I included all in that, but then I also just have this passion for achievement and success for Black students, right, going along the preschool through 20 pipeline, right? And so thinking about how the role of families, communities, all these things matter for Black students, and we need to consider these things, and how do we make them successful? Like that ultimately, everything I do ties back to that, because that's who I am, right? And I want to make sure that we're looking at the ways in which we can have more Black students be successful, to get not only to, but get through higher education, to go and then become, whatever they're going to be, and then come back and make sure that pathway is open so more people can even come in. Like, we're just shepherding more and more folks in to be successful. Long answer, but I'm passionate about it, so sorry.
No, it's all good. And, before we kind of take a trip down memory lane and kind of get into your backstory, can you just expand a little bit on this idea of governance as it pertains to higher education? And like you said, you mentioned the Board of Regents, and I didn't know that a governing body like that existed, until I started working in higher education. I think it's very important for prospective students, but especially current students, to know who these people are, right? Like, when we're looking for a new president of the entire UC system, they're the ones that are on the hunt for this new president. So it's like, yes, you do have a president of the UC system, but they still answer to a governing board of some sorts. And I really like that you mentioned that a lot of times people that get placed into these governing boards are CEOs from the private sector and things like that. And it can very dangerously implement a business model into higher education that should be or at least as it pertains to the UC, public higher education, where we should not be focusing things according to our bottom line, right? It should be about access, equity, and the spreading of resources. So really, before we kind of just dive into your story, really kind of hone in on that idea of governance and why it's important for students, especially Black students, to be aware that these governing bodies exist within our institution.
Yeah, I mean, this is like my bread and butter. I harp on this all the time. I love when I see students have this light bulb, like, what? There's a board? Yeah.
That's exactly.
And not even just a board, but in the UC, they have one of the longest tenures. Like, you get on the board for 12 years and you could be reappointed. So there are some board members who've been there for 20 something years. So you think about the reach, the scope, the breadth of their influence and their power. Multiple UC presidents, right? Multiple chancellors. They also appoint every single chancellor, right? All that sort of thing. And then it trickles down. They determine tuition. Their name is the one on your diplomas and all these sort of things. So they have a lot of power that we don't think about. And so I think it's so important for people to understand that. And the problem is, and I kind of alluded to it before, is that if you're not in these tight circles with these these decision makers, you will never know. You won't have access to that. And until we get more people in those positions, we won't be able to change that. So I'm always pushing my students to even, apply for the student regent position, which is a 2-year position. You only get one as a vote, but you're there for 2 years. And so you think, you don't have as long as the layman trustees, but you have some time, right? There's other positions that you can get by your ex officio status and that sort of thing. But I think it's so important that we think about these positions because, as I mentioned, they go under the radar so often. And we've seen throughout the nation over the bunch of years that when something hits the fan, if you will, it's the chancellor or the president to go. But who put those people in power, right?
Exactly.
It's these boards, and they don't have to go. Like the majority of boards do not have a clause that says like a removal clause unless they choose to. Like they can step down, but there's nothing that will remove these folks. So you think about what job can you have in the nation for 12 years guaranteed that nobody can kick you out, and that you also don't have to have any real qualifications for other than the governor is your homie.
And you create the rules for that board.
Absolutely. And that's really what it is. I've spoken to board members and I'm like, how did you get on the board? Well, Governor such and such and I went to kindergarten together. We've known each other forever. So that's how they get this connection, right? It's not because I'm so qualified. It's not because I'm so passionate about higher education. And let me stop and say, that's not to say that all of them are not like that, that some of them don't have passions for these. So I understand that. But my issue that I take up a lot of times is that if we have no qualifications, it's so easy to perpetuate this cycle of just exclusiveness, right? We could just pick and choose however we want because we don't know what metrics that we're looking at these folks. We don't know, even just apply, right? So few, there's very few, like University of Hawaii, like they have their board, you have to actually apply. But imagine you get this job, you don't have to apply. There's no application for the UC Board of Regents, right? Like it's mind-boggling to me that you can have all this power but not have to be intentional about getting it. It can just come to you, right? And so, that's why I think it's important. I think it's important for accountability measures. Like we have to be able to hold these board members accountable. And if we don't know who they are and what they do, we won't be able to do that, right? And so that's really important. We don't get to see them. Like we can hold our teachers, professors accountable. Like, hey, that's not what you said, because we see them. Like they have a syllabus. We have this binding kind of contract together, right? We can do the same thing with people who are on our institutional campuses. But if you have these individuals who are governing the entire system that might not be on your campus, right? And I think strategically, oftentimes have board meetings in, like Half Moon Bay where all the people are not there and only occasionally come down here and have these meetings. That to me is problematic, right? Like I could tell a story about how, I've gone to board meetings and I've been patted down. They have more security sometimes than going to any other place. And it's like, why are we protecting these people like this? And I know there have been stories of things that have gone awry, but you just think about the import and the power that these people have, and that people don't know who they are. Like that's real power. When people don't know who you are, like that idea of, you want to be that unknown wealthy. Like nobody wants to be, everyone might want to be Beyonce, right? She has a lot of money, but everyone knows that she can't live her life peacefully. Fewer people know Warren Buffett, right? He can walk up and down the street and he has that long money, but he can live and be free. So that's what these board members are doing, right? They're having this power, exerting this power, and no one could really kind of name them. Few people can name them, right? And hold them accountable for these different things. And so I think it's important to know about them. And then at the same time, they're getting a lot of connections out of it, right? So you think about having all the movers and shakers at one table, and it's like, oh, yeah, let me get into this now, too. Like, I have an investment banker. Now, my social capital is growing. My actual capital is probably growing based on all these different things. And so it's so interesting. And I think it's so important because what they do touches every single facet of higher education. You think about something that, like 209 that was passed in 96, right? Like, and that it's on the back, going to be on the ballot to get repealed. That came from a board, the Board of Regents, right? Ward Cumley, who was a board member, put that up and said, let's do this, right? And then whether you agree with it or not, but that's how it got approved, and all these different things kind of trickled down. And you see the effects that we've had. Like everyone knows the research on that. Like ever since then, applications, enrollments of Black folks, brown folks has just declined. And that's a board decision. Like what they do has, it's just a ripple effect. So it's so important that we care about what they do.
No, 1,000%. And, it's kind of ironic because part of the way to, I guess, check their power of sorts is just to make sure that people know that they exist. That concept of, working from the shadows and, you know what I'm saying, pulling all the strings. But I definitely kind of want to talk to you a little bit more about possible ways that, people, quote unquote, on the ground, right? Staff, faculty, students even can hopefully maybe start moving towards changing some of these practices. But really quickly, I definitely want to give the opportunity for our audience to just really get to know you a little bit more, to really add that extra context into all of this great work that you're doing. So if you can you kind of just start off by telling us where you grew up and kind of what was education like in your household growing up as a young child throughout elementary school even?
Yeah, so I started out like a lot of Black folks in the 80s, right? My parents moved us when we used to live in Gardena and Carson, moved us to the city of Diamond Bar, which was, and still is, I shouldn't say was, still is predominantly white and Asian. Right, so grew up there, did elementary, middle, and high school there. So very much that story we hear about, the only one or one of few in the class, that was me, especially when I got to the higher levels where I was taking AP classes, honors classes, and I was the Black female in the class, right? And often I have, I can still name their names, but maybe one Black male in the class with me, or it was just me, right? That sort of thing. And so that has, I think, shaped a lot of what I do because I understand kind of the gatekeeping that happens with that, and recognizing that that's not a place you want to be in, but it's a place that we have to occupy sometimes in order to make it so that the next generation, that's not what it looks like, right? And so I'm very intentional about that, and I think about that, with my 4 daughters. But, growing up, my parents were very supportive and wanting me, I have an older sister and a younger brother, but wanting us to do great, right? And that sort of thing. And it was kind of like this idea for my mom, like good enough never is, right? And then I think I have that in myself early too. I was that child who would cry if I missed one. And so now hindsight, it's not that deep, people, right? You'll be okay. But I try to tell my children that too. But I was and still am my own worst enemy. Like I'm harder on myself than anyone else could possibly be, right? Because I want to be great and I want to exude that, and part of that comes from my family always telling me that, all you have is your name, right? What do you want people to think about when they see your name? That you don't want them to think like, oh, this person is sloppy, they don't know what they're doing, all this kind of stuff. So you need to exude that greatness. And something that my dad used to always tell me is like, you make them as uncomfortable as they want to make you, right? And so what he meant by that and what he would always tell me is that if you are great, that shakes them up so bad. They are like cringing in their boots because this little Black girl is a top person in this class. This little Black girl is a student body president. This little Black girl, right? And all these different things. And, it also stems from the encouragement of my mother, who every single day before I got out of the car for school, or, if I was walking before I left the house, she would say, and who are your ancestors? Like that sort of thing. And then I would have to say African kings and queens. And then she would say, and what does that mean? And I would say that nobody can get me down, right? Every single day, just this rooting of like, you're going out there, you're representing, you might be by yourself, right? And so I have the instances where, people ask white people, oh, do you taste like chocolate? Calling me the N-word, all these different microaggressions and macroaggressions. But I guess I felt so rooted with my family and knew that they would be there to ride or die, right? Like literally, my mom would be in the office on a phone. Like I knew that if anything popped off, my mom would be there. She would take the lead for education, but my dad would be there backing her up. Like he would let her do all the talking, but he would be standing there. Or, just on a random day, I would see my dad on the campus behind a pillar just looking. Like he was that kind of dad that would always just let you know I'm watching, I'm safe, I'm watching them. Like I have my eyes on everything that's going on. And luckily, and I'm not telling a fib here, you can ask my parents, they'll tell you that I was a good kid. Till this day, I don't like trouble. I don't want to get in trouble. So let me do what I need to do so I can stay out of trouble. I've seen people get in trouble. I've had one butt whooping in my life, and that was a group butt whooping because nobody wanted to tell, because I don't need to learn that lesson, right? Like that's just my mentality. But knowing that if I did mess up, or knowing that when I did succeed, like it would make them proud, that to me was phenomenal, right? Like, and that was something that I always wanted to do. And so I had this in me, and then my parents let me know, oh, you could do this. Like when I made my, was going to make my list for colleges, before I started freshman year of high school, my mom gave me the list. She's like, you take these classes and whatever school you want to go to, that's where you'll be, right? And so this is for a person who, I got into all the schools I applied to. Then we're talking about Harvard, Stanford, Yale, Princeton, all the Ivies, all these great schools. And at the same time, still in high school, and I'm obviously performing, having AP calculus teacher tell me that, all I was ever going to be was a housewife, like all these different things. And you're just like, are you serious right now? Like, so you're always dealing with this warring environment, right? This warring identity of, you're great, but they still just see this, right? Like my mom says, when your skin is kissed by the sun, right? Like when you have this melanin, sometimes it's so hard for them to just even see past that, right? And so me trying to be great, doing these great things, being a leader, and just standing out, I think that was a way for me to, in a way, like, that's my resistance. Like, y'all ain't gonna talk about me because what? Here's that A. What? There's that other A. Like that sort of thing. But it was also a way for me to make connections with staff and faculty, on campus and that sort of thing. So I could be, make those connections, be student body president, be class president, be captain of all these sporting teams, have access to, programs. They need somebody to be the voice of whatever, our class, that I would be the one to ask to leave class and go and do that. So I could do that. So that me and another African-American male who's now going to be the first president of the Washington football team, right? He was my classmate. We were co-voted most likely to succeed, right? And so you think about that greatness that comes from that. And then, we came from the same community organization, the Council of African-American Parents. Our families were part of that for so long. We were coming up fighting against a system that would have us not placed in GATE, not placed in the honors classes, even though we were the top students, right? And so that's just what we did, and we didn't know anything else, and these families held us accountable. So if our parents weren't there, we knew somebody else's mama and daddy was going to be there, and they was going to tell our mama and daddy if we weren't there, and that, if we saw somebody on campus, we would tell something was happening. Like, so before anything could pop off, the families knew, right? So, I mean, that community idea, I think is so important, and we talk about that a lot in our community, in the Black community, like, it takes a village and all these different things, but really, that was something that we had to have in a place that was not for Black people at the time, right? Like there were enough, we could count them, right? The people that we had, but yet and still we were doing these great things. So
no, and I, one thing that I love is, the affirmations that your mom provided to you, like, right? Who are your ancestors? Where do you come from? What does that mean? Because really what that was doing was just ultimately preparing you for what you were going to face out in, quote unquote, the real world, right? And it kind of gives you an armor of sorts, right? Because hearing your AP calculus teacher say that to you, hearing other students ask you stupid questions about your skin or, making derogatory comments, like it, and I think it puts a high emphasis on all of the work that you're doing, because for Black boys and girls, the educational system can be a very violent place, and not necessarily violence in terms of like physical harm, but the mental harm and the emotional harm that can come with it. When we look at things like disproportionate suspension rates, or students being placed in learning disability classes when they don't belong there, and not getting called on, like, right, we see all of this research, all of these studies about how our youth is still attacked in these systems. So it's very, very important that at least at home, to the best of your ability, that you can be properly socialized and nurtured and taught to love who you are as a Black woman. So to me, that's very, very special, and definitely I can tell that kind of sets you on the path that you're on now, and for you to be able to navigate these spaces. But I do want you to kind of, highlight the Council of African-American Parents. They are one of our biggest partners here at the CEO unit. And they're obviously doing a lot of great work. Your mother started that and you came up through it. So kind of go ahead and shed some light on that for those of our listeners that might be interested in, looking them up, participating, things of that nature, because I think that's a really amazing program.
Yeah, and I think it's an extension of what was happening in my house, right? So like what you were just talking about, like all these things you're encountering in class, the Council of African American Parents is this beautiful thing where on Sundays, right, and then depending on your program, if it's every Sunday or every other Sunday or one Sunday a month, where you go in and we take over the entire third floor of a building in Cal State Fullerton, and it's just Black people, right? Black students, Black parents. And a lot of us still don't have that. We've never had that. So imagine to be able to sit next to and it's all Black people and to be able to be who you want to be all the time, right? Some of us still feel like we could do that even in the mix of these other spaces, but a lot of times other folks don't have that affirmation, right? And it's great to see the students have that connection, but even more so to me, for the parents, it's like, whoo, it's somebody else, some other parent going through this sort of thing. So yeah, the Council of African American Parents started in 1992. A group of 5 families out of Diamond Bar got together and was like, we got to do something about this because they're trying to suspend our boys. They're not letting our kids in these classes. There's a lot of racism going on. So what are we going to do? And there's power in numbers, right? That sort of thing. And so it's kind of like when you're trying to combat and it's just one parent at a time or 2 parents at a time. No, we have 2, 3, 4, 5 parents at a time. It just continues to grow and grow and grow. Right now we have this arsenal, and it's like, don't come for us unless we come for you. So knowing that they need to take, people always joke that like when your mama calls, they answer the phone, right? Like, and so whether that's in a high school or middle school or even a college campus to this day, because they are known to produce top scholars, right? Like, so I talked about some of the schools I was applying to, but that's not just me. These other scholars are going to some of these top institutions as well. And when these schools need some Black faces, right, even though they're not supposed to use it in different ways, they call CAP and they say, who do you have? Like, who are the students that you have? Like, how can we get them here? So we have our reading circle, which works with students who are in, kindergarten through 3rd grade. So talking about reading, they make their own book about Black folks and their identity, all this kind of thing. And they read lots of stories and they're writing and then doing these things. So that's our entry into like our older programs. And then from 4th to 10th grade, we have this PALS program, personal academic learning system, where the students then, we get a rooting in who we are and whose we are, right? Which is really important, talking about our ancestry, talking about why you have no choice but to succeed, because all these things that you say you don't like or that might be hard, like math or whatever, we made that, we did that, right? This is ours. And so contrary to what you hear, or really contrary to what you don't hear, because they don't include us in the history, they don't include us in any of these informations, right? Is that we did this. If it would not have been for us, we would not have this, right? And so, we do things like, we want them to imagine a world without Black people. So we do this, try to go downstairs. Oh, no, you can't use this because we invented this little piece of the light bulb that, you need to have. Oh, can't use the freezer because that was us. Oh, the vacuum cleaner, yep, that was us. Oh, y'all can't get in the car because we did the stoplight. Like all these different things. And imagine these students, some of them know, which is great, right? But some of them like, what? Like you wouldn't even think about. And it's such a rooting, right? And so like we also have there's academics that happen in that too, but the biggest piece is that we always use through a lens of culture, right? And so that's a big piece. Like they have this academic, this cultural, and this social piece. So we're also celebrating Kwanzaa together. We're doing these affirmations when people are doing kind of a rites of passage and that sort of thing. And so they're feeling the community, right? They've made this their own community. And then the biggest program that we have is a junior senior workshop where we work with 11th graders and 12th graders, and they work weekly. Every week they have to meet from the fall, and they started last week. This year, it just started last week. Our first time doing it on Zoom, so we'll see what happens. From end of August to January, it's the Mad Crunch recommendations, essays, college essays, looking at all these different things, and it's all kind of cumulative, right? Because we don't want our students to just start there. They start way back when, and so we've been grooming them and pushing them and molding them into what we know will make them competitive scholars, because we want the students to be able to say no to schools and not the schools to be able to say no to our students, which is really important. And so we kind of ground them in that. We work with them, and as I mentioned before, a key piece of the Council of African American Parents is unlike most of these academic preparatory programs, is that we infuse the parents. The parents can't just drop off and leave. They have a program, they have a part, and they have a role to play, and we let them know, like, ultimately, it's on you, right? So you think about these parents, if they're not getting what they need at schools, and it's like, we have to put the onus, unfortunately, it's a large burden, we have to put that on ourselves and push for these different things for our students, and we have to push our students, even if they don't want to. They need to. We remind them in other countries and in other cultures where they're in school on Saturdays all the time anyway, so these few hours that they're doing on Sunday is nothing, right? Like, so it's really important. I think it's almost been 30 years, so you can see the longevity of it. You can see the importance of it. It continues to grow. Like, I mentioned Jason Wright, one of our top scholars. We have White House correspondents. We have the guy who's running the right-hand man for Steph Curry, right? Jerron Smith. Like, all these people came from CAP, these great people who have come from CAP, and they understand that this was part, some of them got their wives or husbands in CAP, right? That sort of thing. But just this great community where people still come back and they're so thankful. They come back and they offer internships. They try to help us to continue to patch in people for that. It's won numerous awards regionally, but we work with students, in Riverside County, San Bernardino County, LA County. We have, believe it or not, people come from LA, where there's a lot more Black folks, all the way to the Inland Empire to do this because they know of the rigor of CAP and they know that the high expectations. Like, we don't just say, oh, whatever. No, we will demand. And if any of y'all listen ever get to meet my mother, you will know that you ain't got no choice but to succeed. And she will push you, like literally push you to do what you need to do if that is what it takes, because she has such a passion and a fervor for Black students succeeding and getting opportunities. And it's just a burden on her heart that she does in addition to her full-time job, right? And so I think that is part of the reason why it has been so successful, because it's met a need and it's been successful in producing results.
Yeah, no, you said that, beautifully, and it, even just hearing you talk about it, like, it gets me excited, because it's just so important to make sure that, our young Black students and scholars, like, they're nurtured, they're supported, and they're taught to believe in themselves, as opposed to, like, we're going to get you to GPA, we're going to get you to test scores, we're going to get you to essay skills. But if none of that is rooted in culture, if none of that is rooted in love for yourself and context of who we are as a people, it's just not going to ring off the same way. And I don't think it's going to inspire Black students in particular, to pursue things in the same way. Having that extra cultural context and love and support is so instrumental in making sure that our Black students are successful. So thank you so much for sharing that piece. I kind of want to now kind of take that context, of how you were raised and, how you kind of grew up in the Council of African-American Parents, and just kind of bring it back to, where we're at here at UCR in terms of supporting Black students and making sure that, even though the space may not be made for Black students or might not even be welcoming of Black students, why is it important for Black students to occupy spaces, especially like spaces like higher education?
Yeah, I mean, I'm such a proponent of kind of like the past is a prologue for the future, right? So thinking about all those people, all our ancestors who prayed, fought, died for us to be here. This is the same thing I profess to my elementary school daughters, right? And preschool daughters, is that it's not just for you, right? So it's important that y'all do this, get in higher education and really affect change, be change agents, be these institutional movers and shakers, because it's, you owe a debt, right? Like, we have this debt that we owe to folks who couldn't even read a book, right? Like, who weren't allowed to even own property, who weren't allowed to vote. And we have these things, so we cannot take any of these opportunities for granted, right? Like, sometimes it might not be for you, right? Certain types of higher education, but you do need some sort of post-secondary education and training. I am a proponent of that, right? That sort of thing. But remembering that it's not just for you, going in and understanding that there are still a lot of biases, just, racism, a lot of discrimination. And so, like, if you go up into higher ed and you don't act accordingly, that perpetuates that, right? Like, it's like, oh, yep, they didn't make it. They're not going to do anything, like that sort of thing. So I think for us, for Black students, staff and faculty, we have to all hold each other accountable to be intentional, right? We cannot just let 4 years or, 5 years or whatever the case may be, however long you're there, we can't be passive in that time. I think it's important that you find whatever that thing is that you want to do, or that whatever that wave or that ripple you can make in your section, and do it big and make the most of it, and make sure that you understand that when you're paying tuition, even if you're on scholarship, your tuition is still paid. Get all that you can, right? Take everything, ask questions, don't be afraid to ask questions. I'm always telling students, like, why don't y'all ask a question? I get paid if y'all sit here and look crazy or not. Make me work for it. Make your professors work for it. Make your counselors work for it. Make all these people work for it, because that's why they're getting paid, right? And I think like a lot of times we're taught as a people, to kind of just take what's there, right? And that we have to get away from. We have to, if necessary, ruffle some feathers. We have to demand different things. And it's not to say like, oh, protest about everything, but even just going up to office hours and holding these people accountable for the services that they're supposed to be providing you. I think that is so important. And I think we're in a society in our nation, but even globally, where degrees matter, right? It opens more and more doors. And so I think that's why it's important for Black folks, because we can't own businesses, we can't affect the next generation of leaders. We can't become professors without these PhDs and all these different things. So it's important that we go and get this validation that the world has said. Like, there's a lot of research that said, oh, what does this degree mean? I don't know, right? Like, does your degree from, Stanford differ from a UCR degree? When the UCR student might have worked a lot harder and got more out of it, but the Stanford degree, people still think that means more, right? So go in and make sure that your degree means something to you. I think that that's really important, that you're getting something out of it. I just think it's so important, because we need to really kind of disperse into all realms in society. And so we need to have movers and shakers in medicine and law, right? In the professoriate, right? Leaders and all these different things. And so higher education still remains one of the greatest places where you can go and really do anything. At one spot, you can be trained to do so much. And so that's why I think it's important. And then you can be filled, right, by your peers who might be doing something else. So I might be a humanities superstar, but my homie is in STEM and kicking butt, right? That sort of thing. And that affirmation that comes from that, like, when you see these Black folks rising and doing these great things, I think that is so powerful. And I think that that's important, because we owe it to ourselves, but we also owe it to each other to be great, so that we can continue to move and press forward in this system that, obviously we didn't make the system, but we have to kind of live until we change it and make it something different, right? This is where we are. So we need to really know who are the movers and shakers. And I think higher education is a great way to learn who that is and get those networks so that we can go out and change the world, really.
Yeah. And, one point that you made that I really, really want to emphasize is this idea of value, or extracting value, right? It's very, and when I talk to students about resources on a university campus or at UCR, I always try to ask them, I was like, what's the difference between what something costs and how valuable is that? Yeah. Is that something, right? So your tuition and fees cost this much. Now, how much value are you going to extract out of the cost of your tuition and fees? Because if you're just going to class and going home and doing your work, you could be getting straight A's and, just going to class and going home and doing your work. You're not extracting no value out of your university system, right? You're paying them to do the bare minimum at that part. The bare minimum is the university providing you courses and professors that you can go and sit in and pay attention or not. It's your prerogative, right? But are you utilizing the counseling and psychological services? Are you going to the African student programs? Are you sitting in on town halls? Are you joining committees? Are you a part of student organizations? Are you studying abroad? Are you going to the career center? Are you going to the academic resource center? Are you going to the mandatory office hours that the professors need to be present for, right? So when we look at the cost of our tuition and fees, if you're just going to class and leaving, you're getting no value out of your degree. Even if you do great, you still get your degree, that's fine. But the university is such a unique place, because while it does have its issues, there's very few other places where you can just be in contact with people who are quote unquote experts in their field. Mm-hmm. You want to start a business, you have tons of business professors that have, specialties in all different realms of business that you can help to get your business started. You want to become a professor or a teacher, you have access to these people whose job it is to study these things, to research these things, to coin new terms, new phrases, new practices, right? You're exposed to so much. And if you're not implementing yourself, if you're not injecting yourself into those situations or into those spaces, you're letting the university get away without giving you anything but, quote unquote, your education. And we know education is insanely valuable, right? But without all of that extra context, without utilizing all of those extra resources or talking to people that have access to those resources, you're insanely missing out. So I really like that you kind of emphasize that point on value.
And if I can add, and those networks matter, right? So you talk about not going to office hours or not even going to class. When you need a letter of recommendation, and all I can say is you got an A, but I can't give any color, that is not a strong of a recommendation, right? And you never know when those networks will come into play, right? You think about even, and not to make it political, but you think about what's happening. We just got our new VP candidate, right? Kamala Harris, right? Like, and think about how she's tapping into these networks, right? Like, hey, Mansour's AKA, that's just the network she had from undergrad, right? Like, calling out Howard University. Like, so you pull all these folks in, and then you have this network that you can tap into for whatever the case may be, whatever you're trying to do, right? So if you're getting involved and you're being intentional about these spaces and adding to these networks, you never know when it's going to come in handy, and you need that. And we know the network is often how you get connected, right? It's not even so much, you might not be the most qualified, but you know somebody, right? That helps you get into the door, and that's the way.
And that's how these Board of Regents got their position, right? So
I'm just saying, and it matters so much. So we have to get those connections and know who the power players are. And sometimes, like, I laugh, and students laugh when I tell them, I say, you don't have to be lost to go to office hours. You can know the answers, but still ask the question. No, he don't have to know, or she doesn't have to know. The professor doesn't have to know that you know this stuff already, but they want to see that you're engaged. They want to see that you're sitting there. Like, you just have to make the time. And you don't think about it, but it matters so much about these different things. Or, seeing if you can get an internship, or, hey, like, can I come and shadow you because I'm potentially interested in being the dean of student affairs or whatever. Like, can I come and watch and see what you do? Like, I mean, that's important. We don't think about it because we're just so focused on getting our grades and getting up out of there. Or a lot of times for us, getting our grades, getting our job, because we have to pay for what we have to do, right? And so we have minimal time to do these other things. But those other things are sometimes the thing that lasts beyond the grades, right? Like, that lasts beyond anything else. So I think it's important.
No, yeah, definitely. And again, it just goes back to that idea of value, right? And extracting value out of something. So yes, thank you kind of for sharing. So we're coming up on the end of our interview, but like I said, I do kind of want to circle back to the conversation we started at the beginning in terms of possible solutions to these governing boards and different institutions, and even here at the UC. So, a few weeks ago, we saw the Black Student Union put forth a list of demands to the Academic Senate, and they got a lot of their demands met. And so, again, that speaks to the level of engagement that the Black community, specifically the Black students at UCR, have, and how it benefits all students on the campus, because every single student benefited from that list of demands that was set forth. And so, kind of with that context, when we're thinking about solutions, when we're thinking about these governance boards that kind of police themselves and only answer to themselves a little bit, how can we as staff and faculty, but even more specifically, our students who are oftentimes leading these charges, what are some of the solutions that we need to be thinking about or working towards as it pertains to, regulating these governing boards?
Yeah, I mean, welcome to my research life, right? Like, it's hard. I mean, I would just preface it with that. Like, it's a really hard thing because they're so hard to access at first, right? So I mentioned, like, I do, a lot of my work is qualitative. So I do a lot of even interviews with these folks. And first you have to jump through the hoops of getting it approved, and then going through their 2, 3, 4, 5 secretaries, right? And then finding time on their thing. And then, a lot of them are businessmen or lawyers. And then they want you to sign a non-disclosure, and so they don't ever want to be seen in a bad light. And so really just getting at the real is hard, right? We know that for public institutions, they govern under a thing called sunshine laws, where everything's supposed to be out in the open, but even they'll tell you, and everyone knows that sunshine laws made it worse, because all they do is they have these closed meetings, they do all this stuff and get all the friction out, and then when they come out to the open meetings, it's like, we all agree together, let's just do this and get it done. And so it's really counterintuitive to what we're trying to do. So I would say the difference is like if the more we can have, starting even just undergrad students, be more informed about it and holding them accountable. So going to meetings, right, and speaking, trying to get on the board, right, these student regent positions. UCR had one a few years ago. And, really trying to affect change and be a voice. I think that that's one of the ways, because otherwise these governing board members may never have an interaction with students and might not know what some of these issues are. So I think that's really important. Another way, it's hard to, but we have to have people who get to these upper echelons and who can be movers and shakers and get in there, right? And so it's not that we never have Black folks, right? Like we have some, that have come up and that sort of thing, but it's important that not just Black folks, but brown folks, like everyone, we need to have a diverse perspectives. And so something like, that I look at in my research is we want boards to do more, but they don't know how, right? And I'm not saying that to give them an out, but they really don't know how, and they've never had to, right? Like they've never had to think about race. They've never had to think about money. And so these are things that are really important that we need to force them to think about. Like, how can we force them to be thinking about these things? And so I think the ways in which we could do that is important, because they are, like you mentioned, making these decisions. And then I think we have to just continue to hold them accountable. Like, a lot of folks are excited about President Drake coming in and doing these things and seeing what happens. And I want people to understand, like, he's going to have a lot of pressure. He still has to answer to the board, right? And these boards still don't look like what he looks like. And granted, he's this phenomenal leader. And I'm on the UCBAC steering committee for the entire system. And he was one of our top choices that we've said, hey, y'all need to consider this guy because we think he's great. But even his hands are kind of clipped because he has to answer to this board. And so it's really important, I think, that we kind of get pushed for some, at least, mechanisms to figure out how can we have some qualifications for this role? How can we diversify what's happening? The community colleges, which are the most diverse boards in all different ways, gender, race, all these sorts of things, it's because they often do it by region, right? And so you have to represent whatever community college district you're talking about, right? We don't have that in the UC. The Cal State Board of Trustees is not that way either. So thinking about different ways to appoint and select them. But students, I think the biggest thing is the more students who know about this, the better, because then it's like, then somehow you get to reach them in some way. And I think that that's really important. But the knowledge is the first part, because like you said, like, you didn't know. A lot of people don't know. Like, and then even thinking more about just not just boards, but the entire system of shared governance, right? Where you have like the board and you have faculty and all these different things. Like, there's a way that this institution is supposed to be run, right? And this is your part, and shared doesn't mean equal, right? But everyone has a role to play. The more we hold and understand how this thing works, that's how you get better at it. You think about, when you really want to be a great athlete, those who study the game and know the game, those are the best players. It doesn't matter how athletic you are. If you don't know the game and the way to work the system, you're not going to be able to really affect as much change. So I think that that's really important, that students just continue to learn more and more about how universities work. And I think that needs to be a piece that no student should be able to leave the campus and not know shared governance, not know how universities are run. I think it's as important as learning science and humanities and all these different things, at least a class to say, here's how it works. So you know where your money goes, who do you need to talk to, thinking about an organizational chart, all these things that we would miss if you never took a class like that or never heard about. I think that's it's a shame that people can leave and not know really how higher education works. So
yeah. No doubt. Thank you for sharing that, because awareness, is at least half the battle, right? Once you're aware of the issue, then you can at least start, formulating thoughts on how to tackle it. And so, our final question, I definitely want to end on a little bit of Black optimism, right? Kind of carrying forward that tradition, that you laid out for us earlier, like, right, our ancestors and, their ability to say, not in my lifetime, but in their lifetime, right? So
absolutely.
So just keeping with the spirit of that, what is one of your most optimistic visions of the future as it pertains to Black scholars abroad, or in general abroad, but specifically here at UCR?
I'm so hopeful. I think Black folks are the most optimistic people on the planet. We've had
for better or worse.
Because we're also the most formidable, right? Like, we've had to endure the most. And I'm not saying like, I'm not one of those people like, slavery did this. I'm not one of those people at all. Don't get it twisted, right? I don't think that. But I do think that we've endured more than anyone else has had to endure. So we know that there can be change. We know that we can advance, and like wherever we are now is not where we have to be, right? And so I think that we are a great example of that. So I'm optimistic that in my lifetime, even in my children's lifetime, all my children were born under a Black president. My parents couldn't say that. I think about the progress that we've made, and granted, it's not fast enough, it's not deep enough, it's not long enough, right? But we have had flickers of these great things that are happening. All too often, though, we still have too many firsts for Black people. The first, President Drake is the first Black to run, Black person to run the UC. It's like, what a shame that we still have the first, knowing that all that we have and all that we are capable of, but we have to continue to do that. So I'm optimistic that the students at UCR will go out and be the first. And if someone already was the first, be the second. But I think we have to be intentional about going out and doing something important, right? And not resigning yourself to just be okay. Like, don't do anything just for a paycheck, right? Doing something that you're passionate about, doing something that will have ripple effects and have change. Like my mom always talked about, and it's biblical in Luke, right? Talking about the whom much is given, much is required. You have been blessed, whether you want to believe it or not, to get to this point. There's somebody who took an extra job. There's someone who stayed up all night. There's someone who X, Y, and Z. And so you owe it to us to continue that legacy. And that's something that's ingrained in us. And, we're one of the few people who understand that more than anyone else. Like, if we're not together on this, we can't succeed, right? We have to get together. We have to coalesce and all these different things. So I think my optimism is just for Black students at UCR to find their passion, right? Like, that's one of the things, talking about the value of education. Like, you might have thought, I want to do this all my life, but then you get here and you want to do something else. That's okay, but do that and do that great, right? So take all that there is there, all the knowledge and resources and networks, take that and then go forward and do more, right? And then figure out how you can open up the door a little bit wider or bust the thing completely down for the next people to come in. I think, connecting with other Black folks on campus is really important. I think that's something that we're still working on, because there are always going to be, some core people or some core places. But I think, like, really just getting that synergy together, not just across students, right? But the students need to be connected with the faculty and the staff. And, like, we need to even be more of a unit, I think, as we continue to try to affect change on campus, because there will be things that students can do and can push for that faculty can't, right? But then there are also things that students can't do that faculty can, or staff can, admin can, and that sort of thing. So the more that we can get unified in that, I think that's really important. And I'm just optimistic that folks would just maximize every opportunity and resource and never think that you can't, right? Like, even before someone told you couldn't, don't think that. Try it and see what's going on, see what's happening, and then demand the best. And if you don't get that, then, push in a different way. Or, if you wanted the A but you didn't get it, figure out how you can get it the next time, right? Or how can you make that a learning experience or learning opportunity? But I think that students just really, I think college is one of those times, those college years are some of the most important in your life, right? Where you're out of the shadow of your parents and you're coming into your own thing. So you really have to figure out, what is it that makes me happy? What is it that I could be doing, my whole life? And, this generation, they're going to be changing jobs, they say. But so that means you need to get these core skills that are transferable, right? Networking skills, like all these different things. And so I'm hoping that they just suck UCR dry for all of that and demand more, and demand more representation of folks who look like you in all those services, right? Demand more faculty that are Black, demand more staff that's Black, especially in, mental health services or health services in general. Demand more leaders and admin that are Black. I think that's your right? Everyone deserves to see themselves in those types of positions, and I think that that's really important. So hopefully, our students will also demand that and demand greater and hold people accountable. So I'm optimistic about that, because I have seen students do that. But we need to hold folks accountable, because we're paying, right? Like, this is what we want. Like, if this is what you're putting your money in, like, hey, demand the best. You guys and I always give this example, but if y'all went to like a fast food place and somebody messed up your burger, you would give it back, right? And demand, like, hey, I paid for this. Take off the pickles, like I said, or whatever the case may be. But we don't do the same thing with higher caterers. Like, oh, okay. And we have to change that. We have to change that we can ask questions. We can demand more. And sometimes we're not going to get the answer we want, but by asking the questions, then the next time, I bet you that those admin folks are thinking about, like, well, what if they, and that's how it starts. Like, that's how this whole process starts. Because then they get, I don't want to say like scared, but then they start to worry about, okay, well, I have to think about these folks too. And so if not thought about, then they're not going to change anything on our behalf either. So I think that's important.
No, yeah, beautiful. And, my dad used to always tell me, and it always used to make me mad, but it's true. Closed mouths don't get fed.
Hey, yeah.
So if you hungry and, you know what I'm saying, you need something.
Your dad grew up with my mama saying, she said the same thing. Or what's the worst that could happen? They gonna say no? But you ain't gonna get that anyway, so yeah.
No, yeah. So no doubt. I think that was beautifully said. So, thank you for sharing those sentiments. Dr. Rall, again, thank you so much for coming on Blue, Gold, and Black. We were super happy to amplify your voice, and definitely hope we can have you on again in the future to really start unpacking even more this question about equity and governance bodies, and making sure that, Black folks and Black students in particular can make sure that they're affecting change efficiently, right? Effectively. Yeah. So thank you so much for being here.
This was great. I know I talked a lot. Sorry, y'all. But come take a class, and so you'll get it fired up about it, too. So yeah.
Exactly. So look out for Dr. Rall. You can find her at the Graduate School of Education. Quick Google search. Do your Googles. You'll find her real quick. Reach out to her. She'll be more than happy to support you. So thank you so much, Dr. Rall, and we'll check you guys later.
All right. Take care.
All right. Thank you for joining us on Blue, Gold, and Black. This program is produced by the Community Engagement and Outreach Unit of Undergraduate Admissions at the University of California, Riverside. Learn more about attending UCR by visiting admissions.ucr.edu, and be sure to check out the description for other useful links and resources. Help support this podcast by liking, subscribing, and sharing. And be sure to check out our podcast videos on YouTube. Catch you guys later.